So tell me, Deputy Mayor Maria, you were telling me outside you've been Deputy Mayor under several administrations, starting with Mike Bloomberg and through until Mayor de Blasio, and now, of course, with the new mayor as well. As a successful, prominent Asian American woman from this great city of New York, have you ever been on the receiving end of what I would describe as racial stuff, bad stuff? Tell us what that was like, if that's the case, because I think it's very important we hear personal stories. Over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone. We're both, Deputy Mayor Ann and I, feel humbled to be part of this conversation, and so thank you to the Asian Society for having us here. As Kevin mentioned, my name is Maria Torres-Springer, but really I am the daughter of Elsa and Manny Torres, who immigrated from the Philippines to this country a year before I was born. And I say that not just because that is my story, but in response to the question, have I been on the receiving end of racialized stuff? The answer is of course. And they've happened in ways that are pernicious and explicit, and in ways that are not so explicit, that are mass, but still part of the racialized stuff that I believe continues to make it difficult for too many members of the AAPI community to reach their full potential. And so as an example, growing up in our immigrant household with two parents who'd worked multiple jobs, struggled to make ends meet, I studied a lot, but really most of the time as I was growing up, my job was to be a translator for my family with government, in asking questions, understanding benefits, trying to get through this machinery, the bureaucracy of government, and too often feeling like they weren't hearing it or they weren't getting it. And so that is a form, maybe not as explicit, but a form of violence that I think too many people in the AAPI community have experienced. And then over time, with different roles that I've had, there's also the less pernicious but still really significant form of violence of being silenced, and where people have low expectations of you. And so that in all the different roles that I've had the fortune of holding, it hasn't been just a matter of meeting expectations, but of defying expectations of who I am and what I can accomplish. Now, I'll end this part by saying, and then recently, which I know is the topic of today's conversation, of course, I'm a human being, I'm a New Yorker, I'm a person who's lived through the last several years of struggle and loss in this city and in this country. It has been heartbreaking, and probably the first time I ever felt unsafe in this city was this was after the shootings in the Atlanta area, where for some period of time you might feel invisible as an Asian American, but then all of a sudden you're hyper visible. And so what has that meant in a city where we are 17% of the population, the largest and fastest growing demographic, and yet 1 in 4 Asian American New Yorkers live in poverty? Nearly 50% have limited English proficiency. 70% of us are immigrants, and 40% of the cases, deportation cases pending, are of AAPI people. How do you look at those statistics and the rising violence and not be filled with, both sadness, but I hope also, and this is really where I'll end, but I think part of this conversation is it's okay to be scared. It's okay to even be angry, but the call to action, I think, for all of us, which we have to do together across different sectors, is to translate that anger and that fear into the type of action and allyship that actually allows us all to be stronger and safer. And that is the call for all of us in this city, and will dictate whether our recovery, I think, from the pandemic is one that benefits a few or really kind of lifts all boats, in particular those communities that too often have been invisible, exploited, marginalized, not heard in matters of policy.
That's very powerful, and particularly given your family's arrival and your obviously shared experience with so many folks in this city. Deputy Mayor Ann, this isn't as a foreigner, I come here and I look at New York and I see this is a really diverse city. You roll around the place and you're impressed with its diversity. And therefore, the impression you have of this city is it is therefore almost by definition embracing, tolerant and the rest. But we see race-based crime on the increase, and we see this unfolding across the country. Can I get your reflections on why? Why do you think this is happening? Why is it changing? Why it's getting worse? Before we go on to what the Adams administration is doing in response. Over to you, Deputy Mayor.
First of all, thank you so much for having us. I'm very happy to be here with my sister, Deputy Mayor. We call each other. There are 5 women deputy mayors, and I think 4 of us are women of color. And yes, you can clap for that. I think it makes a difference. And we have here with us today the mayor's senior advisor, Winnie. Stand up, please, who is the senior advisor for Asian Affairs. So there's a lot of strong women on the case, making sure that we get things done.
That's right.
Similar to Deputy Mayor Maria, my parents also are immigrants. They came from Trinidad and Tobago, seeking the American dream and seeking a better life for themselves. And my mom was a single mom. And when I think about growing up in an African-American community, African-American household, single mom, thank goodness she had her a career, but the vulnerability that we feel as people who are marginalized and trying to raise children and trying to feel safe. So I was thinking about that today. But when I think about being a New Yorker, you all, I have to tell you what happened to me this morning. As the Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services, I oversee the Administration for Children's Services. And while we were on our telephone call at 8 o'clock this morning, I got word that one of the workers who was on his way to work on Lenox and 125th Street was shot, just shot on his way to work on broad daylight in Lenox and 125th Street. So 2 things. I'm a mom. My 26-year-old son actually lives around the corner from that. And so when I think about being in New York right now, and I think about just diversity of where we are, it feels a little chaotic. It feels like we're still in this place where we can't feel good and safe and strong on our feet and ready to move forward. I think that, I want to say that because I think that's almost every community is feeling like, how come my garbage doesn't get picked up on time? How come I don't see police officers? How come I don't feel safe? How come the streets seem dirty? How come, right, all of these things, and it affects us. It is, you know, you don't need me to say that coming out of COVID, we all are out experiencing isolation. We'll talk about mental health later. I think something's happened to us. I think there's some increased level of lack of tolerance, and I don't love the word because I think we should do more than just tolerate each other. Yeah. There's an anger, there's an edge. I mean, and we're New Yorkers, so we have an edge, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you don't know that if you just say something to somebody, what's going to happen. And I know Maria said that we shouldn't talk about fear, but I want to,
Oh, so we should talk about fear.
Oh, is that what you said? Yeah. Oh, okay, good.
Okay.
Good. We'll get to hope later.
Yeah.
But I think that even in our dialogues with each other, what we see on the news, I know you say you're a junkie for what's happening at City Hall. When I get home, I have to turn the TV off for a minute because I'm like, why is everybody screaming at each other? Why can't anybody understand each other? Why is everybody so mad all the time? Right? Right? You guys? You gotta. I know I'm a Baptist, so we communicate with each other. And I'm trying. How do we?
Preacher sister.
Yeah. Oh, okay. How do we raise our children in an environment where everybody's mad all the time? How do we teach and get back to a place where we can be civil and have civil dialogues? And so I think I think we're struggling. And I think all of us are struggling right now. And then when you overlay with the mental health issues that we've seen and the people who have really been isolated, the lack of supports and services, I think it's a combination of all of these things coming together. And the only thing that I will say, Kevin, is we are diverse, but we're kind of segregated. We all, right? Okay, see, they're shaking their heads. We have our little neighborhoods, and we don't go out of our neighborhoods. And so this, even as we are diverse, I think we have to come back to a place, and the mayor says this all the time, where we are appreciating each other's diversity, and we are working together, because that's the only way we're going to get New York back and get to the recovery of where we want to be as New Yorkers. Mm-hmm. So I'll stop there, and that's where I'll start.
That's right.
It's funny you say that, you know, because as someone who's lived in your midst, I have noticed that despite the fact that you've got people who come from everywhere, as I walk up the streets, I see often Asian Americans with other Asian Americans, or I see African Americans with other African Americans. I see white Americans with white Americans, and I don't see a whole lot of mix. And I know these are sensitive questions. I'm just a bumbling foreigner saying insensitive things, but that's what I intend to do, because I'm Australian and by definition we're insensitive. But I just thought I'd name it.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Rather than pretend it's not there in plain sight. So, you represent an administration, the Adams administration. What are you guys doing about it? Let's get on to hope.
Yes, so let's get on to hope. But can I respond a little bit to how we got here as well?
Yeah,
because
sure.
I've always been a big believer that we need to understand and acknowledge our history if we are to transcend it, right? And while we are at a moment in time and it feels all of the hard things that it feels, we also shouldn't kid ourselves that this is a new thing and that everything prior to this was so easy. I mean, if you look at our history as AAPI people in this country, it's a history that has over time, right, included Chinese exclusion, Japanese internment, xenophobia against South Asians and Muslim Americans. And then in the last federal administration, as Kevin mentioned, racialized accusations, hateful speech given the COVID-19 pandemic. And so when we look at violence against particular people in the city or elsewhere in the country, we can't, in my opinion, just take the Atlanta shootings. Like, what happened there, for instance?
Right.
You can't, that is inextricable from the history that I just described. It's also inextricable from the global epidemic of violence against women. It is inextricable from the exploitation of workers who are laboring at the margins in our society. And so, not to dwell too much on the part that is hard, but I think we need to grapple with that as a country and as a city so that we can transcend it in our work moving forward. And so, what is that work?
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
Kevin's going to get mad. But did you feel like that was under the surface and we were all pretending like we were good?
I think for a lot of communities, and I think we have to grapple with the voices from, the expectation from this thing that we call the AAPI community, which is ridiculous since it's like 40 countries, 100 different languages, and a community that has the highest income earners and the highest educational achievement on one hand, and the lowest with South Asians and Southeast Asians and Pacific Islanders on the other, on those very same metrics. So there was a masking, I think, Anne, of the complexities of the community, and the last few years have been a spark. And they're either a spark that further entrenches the type of divisions and social fragmentation and deep political stalemate that we've all experienced in the country, or it somehow helps cure it. It somehow repairs it, which, obviously I don't think is going to happen overnight. And it's certainly not just the work of the city or city government, but I think that's the invitation. That's the challenge for all of us in all of the hats that we wear. And I know Anne and I we feel a lot of responsibility, of course, with the time and the roles that we have in government to make a dent on these issues for the AAPI communities, with the AAPI communities, but because that actually helps all communities of color.
That's right.
In this city,
Yep.
right?
I'm glad you've, Deputy Mayor Ann's raised this, which is to what extent was it always there?
Right.
And you've said there's been something about unmasking. Look, I can't compare our two countries, Australia and the United States. It's different in many respects. When I was elected Prime Minister, my first act as Prime Minister was to deliver a formal national apology in the Parliament of Australia to Aboriginal Australians who had been mistreated for 200 years, appallingly. And something happened at that moment. Didn't solve everything, but solved some things, which was to simply name it, acknowledge it formally, that this has been an appalling history of racial inequality and racial abuse in our country. And everyone expected in our country, which is not all that different to here in some respects, in terms of its settled history, that there would be a huge racist reaction from the white majority. There wasn't actually. Suddenly, by naming it and describing it in fairly graphic detail in the formal text of the apology which I delivered, half-hour speech in the Parliament, everyone said, yup, yeah, it really was that bad, it really is that bad. And it actually helped turn the corner to what we call closing the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. Mm-hmm. We're not there yet, but we're some ways along that road now. And the reason I raise it in this context is we actually needed a time of formal acknowledgement of it. Right. And I often wonder about the Congress here as why they don't do this stuff with Native Americans and African Americans in particular. So, now that I've got that off my chest, and given that we've thrown the rule book out for this discussion completely, back to City Hall.
And like, what is the role of government?
Yeah. And what's the Adams administration now doing on this question? And I fully accept this is much wider than local government, but practical stuff that you folks are doing.
You want to start? Want me to start?
Yeah. No, I'll name a couple, and
Go
then
ahead.
so there's what we are doing and how we are doing it. All of both of which are, of course, extremely important. We know that it should start. Of course, it has to have representation, and so Mira Joshi, another sister deputy mayor, like she and I are the first Asian American deputy mayors in the history of this city.
Crazy.
Wow.
And we have extraordinary colleagues like Winnie and other AAPI leaders heading up important agencies. And that is important, and we know it can't stop there. And so where does it have to go now? It has to involve a few things, in my opinion, and it has. We have to translate that representation into the types of actions that AAPI communities care about, whether it's public safety, education, small business development, workforce development, and actually engage on those issues that are relevant, that are important to AAPI communities. Then there's the how. And the how means making sure we're engaging the entire enormity and beauty of the AAPI community. This is so much of what Winnie has helped us do. It's that we need to create more porousness between government and different parts of the AAPI community so that those voices are at the table. We need to make sure that we are thinking from a data perspective in a really smart and effective way, and disaggregating where we need to, what is happening to different communities within the larger AAPI community. And then I think it's also fundamentally about making sure that those types of partnerships are enduring, and that we are not just extracting from different organizations in the AAPI community, but really working in partnership. And then Deputy Mayor Ann's done tremendous work on mental health. Everyone in the administration is focused on public safety. The people who are working with me in my portfolio focused on workforce and on small business. Those are issues that we have to get right for all New Yorkers, but then make sure that the how of that work is effective as it relates to the diverse AAPI communities in this city.
Dear man.
I think I agree with that. I think under my portfolio, I have the Department of Homeless Services, I have the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and so it's like where the rubber hits the road. You all have to hold us accountable, not just be like, we're going to get it done and kumbaya and come to the table once, but it's like, I don't feel safe in the subways. So the mayor started right away and set up a task force, and we were meeting every Sunday evening, and he wanted to see what the numbers were, and we set goals for ourselves, and he's very hands-on and very clear about what we need to be doing in communities and how we're bringing people to the table so that we can make sure that the subways feel safer, something as simple as that. When we think about COVID, there's a COVID recovery task force. What did we learn by this experience? What are we going to do differently? And right when we were trying to do that, and when we came in, there was Omicron, then monkeypox happened over the summer. So what did we learn, and how are we taking that, and what are the goals that we're setting for ourselves? And now we're dealing with polio. Now we're dealing with asylum seekers. And so all of those things have to be things as government that we're doing good government. We are taking care of all of those things, but not taking our eyes off the prize in terms of the promises that we've made, frankly, to the AAPI community in terms of making sure that you all are at the table, that we're hearing what you're saying, that we're being responsive, and for me, that we're putting resources into places where it really makes a difference. Early on in the administration, we had a meeting with the community, and the mayor's really interesting. So he'll bring people into the cow, and people will be it's kind of intimidating, and he'll sit back and he'll say, I want to hear from you all. And it's not like he's pretending, he really wants to hear from you. And I felt like it was a moment where we were bearing witness to people's stories. And you will have people rushing him like, it's time to go to your next meeting. And he's like, I'm not done, I'm listening. And so that ability to hear people talk about their fear, to hear people talk about the stigma. We're like, oh, mental health, you just need more mental health services. And people are like, what? In my community, we don't talk about mental health. You can't just say that. You have to listen to us. You have to see what we're talking about in terms of what's culturally appropriate and where those services are going to be and who are giving those services and who are the clinicians and where they're located. He makes us get into the weeds because it's in the weeds that we're going to find solutions. And, you know, for good or for bad, he's not the mayor that's sitting in City Hall, not in the midst of it. He wants to be out. He wants to make New Yorkers better. And I think, as Deputy Mayor Maria says, if any of us are unsafe, I don't think any of us are safe. No, and I think he really feels that.
And I remember a particular roundtable that we had with different leaders in the AAPI community precisely on this topic of public safety and violence. There were a lot of tears.
A lot of tears.
A lot of tears. And it came from of course, it always comes from a genuine place. And we didn't try to artificially change the mood. I mean,
right.
part of, I think, the healing of this is having us kind of grieve through it.
That's
and
right.
The mayor was really fantastic in kind of holding that room and hearing all of this.
Yep.
And we talked about during that meeting, so just a couple of very concrete things with the AAPI community and some of the issues we've talked about is the fact in our criminal justice system, if it is a hate crime, we need to call it a hate crime. We need to have a process and a police commissioner and a system that allows for that to happen, that resources that. As hard as it is, it's part of acknowledging that this is something that is happening in our city. And then to the education part, you know, just a few months ago, the mayor announced with the school's chancellor, right?
The curriculum.
The curriculum, AAPI history, is really being a true part, an authentic part of the curriculum in our schools. Hadn't been done before, and no one thing is going to solve the issues given its complexity that we're dealing with, but each has its place in allowing us to be the type of city that is as just and as equitable and really recognizes the full dignity of every person who tries to succeed here.
Deputy Mayor, and in terms of your portfolio responsibilities, which I listened carefully to before, and homelessness, the years and years ago, and again, a little bit of an Australian story. I was here with my wife, Therese, and she's always had a passion for homelessness in our country. So she went and visited this place down here called Common Ground.
Oh, yeah.
And so we learned from that. And so when I eventually was elected Prime Minister, around inner city Australia, we built 1,000 of these facilities, 1,000 beds, I should say, not 1,000 such tall buildings. But this great nexus between people sleeping rough, homelessness, and mental health, mental illness. It had a palpable effect in inner city Australia in radically reducing the number of people sleeping rough and almost getting rid of it. So we learnt that from here. So in your work today, what if you had your wish list of what would actually get rid of homelessness in this city?
Oh, this is an easy question, Kevin.
No, it's a hard question.
No, it's not.
That's why I'm asking it.
The solution for homelessness is housing.
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 Know that.
Housing, baby.
Say it with me. More housing.
More housing.
And therefore, the role of government and the private sector is to do what?
This is a real passion of mine.
So we actually built it, is what I'm saying, as a
Yeah.
state.
No. I mean, it's so... how much time do we have? I'll be short. I mean,
We've chucked all the rules.
we are
That's
in
fine.
a deep and ongoing housing crisis in this city, in this state, and in this country. In the last decade, for every 5 jobs that have been created in this city, we've only built 1 unit of housing. And as Anne knows all too well, and it's heartbreaking, close to 60,000 people slept in shelters, many women, many children. And that, too, is a form of violence.
That's right.
It's a silent violence in some ways, but it's the type of violence that is causing people to make these unfathomable decisions about whether to pay the rent or to eat, to pay the rent or to take medications, and having the elderly, the sick, and children wonder where they're going to sleep at night. And so the answer is on all levels of government, we need to do more to build housing in this country. And that requires the type of, on one hand, we know what the programs are. This isn't complicated policy. This is, on one hand, having the resources to ensure that that housing gets built, and then, and this one's harder, the political will, many levels of government, to make it easier to build housing. And today, that is very, very difficult. Some for reasons that are understandable, others because we just have a system that for every little project, you have to run a political gauntlet to get it done. And it's too easy to say no
You
to
mean
that
because
project.
of where it is?
Versus, yes.
The locality
because of-
factors, not next door to me, thank you.
Yeah,
Exactly.
no, there's a
not in my
aspect of it.
neighborhood.
Yeah.
That's right. And so what would it look like if we untethered ourselves from the routine politics that makes it just too easy to say no to housing? And, you know, that won't be overnight, but that is the root of so many of our issues.
And so I just to also give it perspective, because I know you all are like, that's not how we solve homelessness. We got to get those crazy people off the streets. And when she says 60,000, most of those are children and families. And the 3,800 people that are sleeping on the subways that we're like, we need to get, that's 3,800. So yes, for
Of the
those people,
60,000.
right, we need, they're severe, many of them have serious mental health illness. We need more psychiatric beds. We need ways to get, to be able to get some folks in and use Kendra's law more. We need all of that. But that's sort of a small group of people when you think about the majority of people that are homeless in this city and in this country. So just to give you that perspective.
But it's a solvable problem.
It is a solvable
if we put
problem.
our political imagination and our financial resources to it.
Correct.
This is a city of how many million?
How many million?
Yeah, 9-ish.
I was gonna
Yes,
say 8.
60,000, 9 million, one of the wealthiest cities on the planet. You can fix this. You can do it. Now, folks, you get to ask questions rather than to listen to me moderate. So if you really want to ask our 2 deputy mayors a searching, penetrating and difficult question, now's your time to do so. Hear about what the administration is doing in response to the challenges in the city particularly on the question of the safety and security of Asian Americans and AAPI.
Or suggestions that you may have for us.
That's right.
Or ideas.
Or positive ideas coming forward. In the front here.
I don't know that either one of us have the data. We should have brought the police commissioner with us, our sister police commissioner. But I think you're absolutely right that when you think about sophisticated policing, and it's one of the good things about having a former police officer as your mayor, to look at where crimes are being committed, where do you put the resources, which particular communities, what times of the days, who seems to be target. You know, when you say the who's doing the crime, I think that, you know, we want to be careful that we're not pigeonholing certain, you know, people. We know that people commit crimes for all the reasons that we said. People are homeless if they had jobs, if they were doing other things, if they had other opportunities, if they had better educations, like you actually know all of that is connected. So I think we can get back to you with some of that, but I want you to know that, yeah, that is how the mayor does his crime and operations strategies as he's trying to decrease shootings, decrease assaults, decrease all of those different things. So we can talk a little bit about that. Maria, anything to add?
No, all of that. The other thing that I'll say is we face the reality of crime and the perception of crime in this city. And one of the things that I think is hardest is whatever the numbers might say, every day on the front page of our tabloids are all of the stories that are heartbreaking and hard, which doesn't mean, of course, that those stories have to be told. We can't mask them, but it is a challenging time for all of us. When you wake up and you scroll through your social media feeds, or you look at our papers, and it's very rarely the stuff that's good and that we know is happening in our communities. And so there's a response, because that stuff doesn't get the clicks and the coverage, right, that some of these other stories do. And so I think that is also the reality that we all face. And from a policymaking perspective, there's what is actually happening, but let's also not deny what people are feeling. And they feel that it could, whether it is actual crime or frankly, when the streets are dirty, right? When you feel like something is off, that Anne mentioned. And so we're working on all of those gears, so that the New Yorkers get to assemble. It will always still be kind of dirty. I mean, it is New York City, but that there is. But there's a level of security that everyone feels, so that we are not going to stand back up the city that existed before the shutdowns, before COVID, but a better version of ourselves.
The only thing I want to add is racism and the police department, and not over-policing, and trying to make sure that we're not going back to a place where that is the only strategy that we have. And so I think that is why the mayor's really talked a lot about upstream strategies. Like, we don't have to wait for the 16-year-old to steal somebody's chain or to knock over the elderly woman. What should we be doing, and how do we work with that 16-year-old before they're doing that? So I just want to say, I think we're balancing all of those things when we think about equity and racism. We don't want to make the carceral system our answer to everything.
Yeah, policing is a core response. It's an essential response, but it ain't the only response.
It's not the only response.
Further questions? Over there, sir, for you, back there, and then I'll come to... That's you. Yeah.
Kevin and Maria, thank you very much for a very thought-provoking panel. My name is John Ward. I'm a retired U.S. diplomat, and I've served in Papua New Guinea and South Asia and the Middle East. But I grew up in a county of 100,000 people in the Midwest in the 1970s. And our parents fought World War II and experienced the demonization of the Japanese. And they fought in Korea, and our uncles fought in Vietnam. So there was a predisposition towards hatred of Asians. And I look at my own journey and, well, sure, you know, I had the advantage of going around the world. We can't do that for everybody. I didn't meet my first Asian friend until I was 17 years old, and I didn't really work with Asians until I joined the Army. So, Kevin, to your point, you know, you see white people together, you see Asian people together. What can the city do to try to bridge those gaps in proactive action whether it's in the schools or for adults. If I went to the Indian Independence Day parade, I was, one of a handful of gringos in attendance. So we celebrate diversity in New York, but how do we proactively bridge those gaps?
There's a tricky one.
I think there are certainly things the city can do, but I actually would kind of throw that question back out to New Yorkers, because part of what the invitation is to really repair what is clearly a fraying kind of civic and social fabric across the country. And so it could be as easy as, and I think more and more people are doing this, checking in on AAPI brothers and sisters, neighbors, as an individual. It could be about educating ourselves, and of course the city has a role, I mentioned the curriculum earlier, about that history that is beautiful and painful at the same time. It could be about bystander training that I know more and more people are participating in, but all of those various forms of allyship, the city can create spaces. We have amazing, in some ways, the new commons, whether these are public spaces we have to make sure are safe and clean. Our libraries are, of course, they're extended dining rooms and community spaces. All of those we have to nurture and support, in my opinion. And then there's the work of individuals towards this goal, which I think, if nothing else, the pandemic has made very clear the need for the type of connection and human connection that physical proximity makes harder, but then all of the underlying stuff has also really made harder over time.
The only thing I have to add is that, and I have to be honest, the people in my life, when I look at them who have the most diverse amount of friends, are my children. And my young people are great. And, they're teaching us and their grandparents a different way of being. So I think, some of us may be stuck in our ways, but looking to young people on college campuses, in high schools, they're leading the way, I think, in a lot of ways about what we can be doing better together.
One thing I've noticed here, we'll go to Lulu now, you guys don't really go to church together. Like I go to a white church up there called Church of Heavenly Rest. It's an Episcopal church. It's totally diverse, except there are no African Americans. From time to time, I've been down to Abyssinian Baptist.
That's my church now, Kevin. Watch out.
There's
white people in there, Kevin.
I know.
They may not be jamming like we're jamming, but they may praise the Lord differently.
No, I was there, but when I jam, everyone around me just laughs because I just got...
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Bad.
Just don't do it.
But you know something? There are not a lot of white folks down there.
They're not.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm being the ignorant foreigner here.
No.
I'm just
but, I think there's a time for us to be in our folks and to worship and to eat. Like, I don't want us to be like, everything has to be together all the time. I think that there's places for us to show our culture and be together, and so it's all good.
Your worship is much more fun than Church of Heavenly Rest. I've got to say, I have a lot more fun.
The Lord sees us all, Kevin. Don't worry.
I think the Lord has more fun with you guys at Abyssinian, let me tell you. Lulu, and then the gentleman in the orange top here.
Thank you, Kevin. I hate to take time from our other guests, but I'm so excited to hear the deputy mayors talk about how we change the mood in the city. We can do programs, but the mood, and you began in the start of the program by talking about there's this rage and this anger. It's simmering. And we see it all around the world. We're seeing attacks on innocent people all around the world. So we have to have programs to stop that. But at the same time, I think if each of us undertook to do one act of kindness to our fellow human beings every day, and we made this a habit, it might make a difference. I noticed after 9/11, when we all were so damaged and fearful, New Yorkers who are always so busy, they began to talk to each other. When you got on the bus, you said hello to the bus driver. When you got off, you said thank you, which New Yorkers never did. You got into a cab, you started talking to the cab drivers, and it makes a difference.
It does.
And I started doing that, and I so enjoyed it that I still do it to this day, because each time when you say something pleasant to a cab driver, he's usually quite surprised because most New Yorkers are not so polite. And you say thank you to a bus driver, it just brightens your day and brightens their day. So we can, maybe the mayor could have a campaign.
There's something in this.
Do a good deed to your fellow New Yorker. Just to, and at the same time doing all the programs that the public expects, so they don't think you're trying to get off easy. But really, I think George H. talked about 1,000 points of light. But if you have kindness just coming from each individual, and it becomes infectious, that might be one way to just deal with this terrible anger that we see everywhere.
There's a lot in that. Now we've unleashed 1,000 questions with time to wrap up. So what I'm going to do is what we call in the business a lightning round, because I know our deputy mayors have other appointments which they must meet. So stick your hand up. You've got 30 seconds each to make your point, raise your question, and then the deputy mayors can choose what they respond to very quickly. Here?
Oh, my goodness.
Okay.
So I'm facing a lot of corruption and discrimination from financial institutions, private organizations, as well as federal and city government. And I bring it to light, and I get customer support, and I even get a caseworker from regulatory agencies, but I don't get fair treatment, or I don't get the situation resolved when I have very concrete evidence of people literally stealing my money. So I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
Well, thank you for that. We'll see what can be done about this. Rick up the front here, if that's okay. No, you're going to get... Rick, you'll be treated
very quick,
later.
Just to follow on Lulu's comment, I think that every year I found out that February 17th is International Random Act of Kindness Day. I think lots of people didn't know. I didn't know, and I found out, it's just a few days after Valentine's. I think we can do something, right, to promote this holiday, the celebration, and, just do something small. Like if you go buy a cup of coffee, you say, hey, I buy for you, Then you start conversation, and then happy faces and smiles. So
just be careful now. We're not there yet. She's like, buy somebody a cup of coffee.
I think it's good to have this campaign. I really like this.
Yes.
Thank you.
She's on her way down to Abyssinian too. So.
Exactly.
Okay, over here.
Thank you. Mine's quick. So I think deeply a lot of the Asians that live in the city, we're just afraid that, when there's a violence happen, it's just another news cycle. So my question to you is that what are the things that you've done or the city is planning on doing just can really guarantee the continuity of enforcing a lot of the things that we were talking about when the news cycle were there?
Gentleman next to you, yeah.
Thank you first for your fair and transparent discussion. So I'm Inda, and I'm working for the UN World Food Program, and we spoke about this violence on the street, in the subway, which is obviously visible and offline. But what about all the violence that's happened online, on the social network, on the media, and especially about for our kids and teenagers communities? So
good, thank you. And the last one up here. Oh, gentleman at the back there, I'm sorry, and then back to Rick at the front, and then we'll wrap it up.
Thank you so much for the very stimulating discussion, and happy International Cinnamon Bun Day. Love random holidays. My name is Cecil Brooks. I wanted to highlight the diplomat's point and question about how to potentially move forward. And as someone who was working in Congress until recently, now I'm studying at Georgetown, doing the congressional commute. I find that something that is really on people's mind is really not being familiar with people who don't live in their community. And as someone who lives uptown in the South Bronx and the Harlem area, we've really been trying to build partnerships, especially with our growing Asian community, which is about 10% almost of the East Harlem community. And something as simple as a dumpling tour or supporting the AAPI businesses there, that's more and more important, because we see with a lot of the crime statistics, certain groups of people maybe are shown more often than others. And that goes to an important point about perception of crime. When a lot of us have love and kindness and solidarity with other Asian and Asian American populations. So it's important to really highlight those beautiful stories when we get a chance, and to ask those questions and support businesses, put our money where our mouth is.
Thank you very much. And lastly, Rick at the front here, and then I'll ask our two deputy mayors to wrap up.
Thank you for the opportunity. Really quick, on some of the budget appropriation issues, supporting anti-Asian hate, public health, mental health in particular, for example, do you have to work with Republicans? And how's that going?
There you go. That's an existential political question to end with.
No.
So I think, Deputy Mayor Maria, you get to go second last. Deputy Mayor Ann's going to wrap it all up for us.
Excellent. Amazing feedback and recommendations. I'm sorry for what you have experienced. I really am. And would love to follow up and see if there are ways that we can help. I wanted to respond to what does it mean for this to not be subject to just a news cycle and forgotten, because that, I think, is exactly what the work is. And that only happens if there is a form of accountability that is enduring. And it includes having, I think, the right people in the places, because for us this isn't a news cycle, this is like part of our own story and part of our responsibility. It means accountability and having the right types of organizations continue to hold us to account. We know that they're not going away. They're not going to stop calling Winnie or me or Ann, and they shouldn't. And then it means tackling the underlying issues, why there is this type of division, why there is this violence, these types and compounding crises in this city, and really getting at that, which will help, in my opinion, both the AAPI communities and, as I described earlier, really all New Yorkers. And so we have to be focused on those issues of housing and education and workforce training and all of the stuff that's fundamental to what makes this city strong and this country strong, and make sure we're not losing sight of that as we do our work every day.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Ann.
I was thinking that we end where we start, which is we're both raising children in this community. We are wives. We have families here. So this really matters to us. And so we take it seriously, and we're holding ourselves accountable to do something different and to leave us better and things better than when we found it. I was struck by the amount of hope and good suggestions that were in the room. I teased you about saying you want to buy somebody coffee. But I think I want us, and I haven't said the word well-being, because we keep on saying mental health, but what it is, it's about our own well-being and how do we get well together and heal together. And so I want to remind you, just as we are ending, that despair is contagious. Rage is contagious. That feeling of, it's contagious. But you know what else is contagious? Hope, love. And so when you talked about kindness and you put that word into the room and you were like, I need the mayor to do that. Yeah, we need the mayor to do it, but we need to do it. And we need to do it in the work and with each other, because I think that healing together is going to get us back, not just to the New York that we were before, but to a better place, and to reimagine what our experience can be like as humans together as we go on this journey together. So thank you so much, Kevin, for having us. And, we hope to come back another time with the police commissioner so we can make sure that we're answering your questions.
That's right.
Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for two remarkable women leaders of the city of New York.